The night before my wedding, my sister sent me a video with no message attached. I watched it 3 times before I understood why she was crying. The video was 2 minutes and 38 seconds long. The first time I watched it, I thought it was footage from some party I didn't recognize, shaky phone camera work capturing people drinking and laughing in what looked like a hotel room. The second time, I noticed my fiancée Natalie in the background, wearing the red dress she'd bought for her bachelorette party 3 weeks ago, the one she'd modeled for me over FaceTime while I was working late. The third time, I watched the timestamp in the corner showing the video was recorded 6 hours ago, and I watched my fiancé kiss my best man in a way that made my stomach turn inside out. Not a friendly kiss, not a drunk mistake that lasted a second. A deliberate, familiar kiss between two people who'd done this before, who knew each other's mouths, who weren't thinking about anyone watching because they didn't know anyone was. My sister's face appeared at the end of the video, tears streaming down her cheeks as she mouthed, "I'm sorry," before the recording stopped. I sat on the edge of my hotel bed in my boxer shorts at 11:30 at night, holding my phone, feeling my hands shake so badly I almost dropped it. I'd been with Natalie for 3 years and engaged for 8 months when this happened. We'd met at a marketing conference in Chicago, where I was presenting on digital strategy, and she was attending for her company's social media department. She'd approached me after my panel, asked intelligent questions about consumer behavior analytics, and given me her business card with her personal number written on the back. Our first date lasted 6 hours. Dinner stretching into drinks, stretching into walking around the city, talking about everything from childhood memories to career ambitions. She was smart and funny and beautiful in this effortless way that made me feel lucky every time she chose to spend time with me. My family loved her immediately. My mother said Natalie reminded her of herself at that age, ambitious but warm. My father appreciated how she asked about his work and actually listened to his answers. My sister Claire, who was 23 and finishing her master's degree, had been cautious at first, but eventually warmed up, especially after Natalie helped her prep for a major presentation that landed Claire a competitive internship. The proposal had been exactly what Natalie wanted, a surprise weekend trip to Napa Valley with the ring hidden in a picnic basket at a vineyard she'd mentioned loving. She'd cried when I got down on one knee, said yes before I'd finished asking, called her parents immediately to tell them. Wedding planning started the next week. Natalie had opinions about everything, which I appreciated because I had no idea what made one flower arrangement better than another or why certain venues mattered. She wanted a summer wedding at this estate outside the city, 200 guests, a band instead of a DJ, and my college roommate David as my best man, because David had introduced us at that conference by inviting me to the happy hour where Natalie first approached me. I'd agreed to everything because making Natalie happy made me happy, and watching her excitement about planning our future together felt like confirmation I'd made the right choice. David had been my best friend since freshman year when we'd been randomly assigned as roommates and discovered we both loved basketball, hated our economics professor, and shared the same dark sense of humor about academic pressure. We'd stayed close after graduation, talking at least once a week, even when our careers took us to different cities. When I moved back home for a job opportunity, David had already been working in the city for 2 years and helped me find my apartment, introduced me to his network, and generally made the transition easier. He was successful in commercial real estate, charming in that way salespeople are when they're genuinely good at reading people, and he'd been enthusiastic about being my best man from the moment I asked. He'd planned my bachelor party, coordinated the groomsmen, and even helped negotiate with the venue when there was confusion about our contract. Natalie had said multiple times how lucky I was to have a friend like David, someone who cared enough to put in real effort. I watched the video a 4th time, paying attention to details I'd missed before. The hotel room had floor-to-ceiling windows showing the city skyline, which meant it was expensive, probably downtown. Natalie's hand was on David's chest, familiar and possessive. David's hand was on her lower back, pulling her closer. They were alone in the frame for most of the video, though I could hear other voices in the background suggesting more people were in the suite. The kiss lasted 18 seconds. I counted. 18 seconds of my fiancé kissing my best friend the night before our wedding while I sat in a different hotel room organizing my vows and my father's speech and the rings I'd picked up from the jeweler that afternoon. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Are you okay? Please call me. I'm so sorry you had to see that, but I couldn't let you marry her without knowing." I tried to call her back, but my hands were shaking too badly to press the right buttons. I tried again and got it on the 3rd attempt. Claire answered immediately, her voice thick from crying. She said she'd gone to Natalie's bachelorette party earlier that night even though she wasn't in the bridal party, just as my sister supporting my fiancé. The party had been at someone's house initially, then moved to a hotel suite downtown that one of Natalie's friends had booked for after-party drinks. Claire said she'd been in the bathroom when she came out and saw Natalie and David disappearing into one of the bedrooms. She'd thought it was weird, but tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were looking for something or having a private conversation about best man and maid of honor duties. But then she'd heard Natalie laugh in a way that made Claire uncomfortable, intimate and flirtatious, so she'd opened the door slightly and started recording because something felt wrong. She'd watched through her phone screen as Natalie and David kissed, and she'd kept recording until they pulled apart, and David said something about being more careful because people were starting to notice. Claire said she'd left the party immediately, sat in her car crying for 30 minutes trying to decide what to do, and finally sent me the video, because she couldn't let me marry someone who'd do this. I asked Claire if she was sure it was recent and not some old footage. She said she'd checked the metadata. The video was recorded at 9:43 p.m. tonight, less than 3 hours ago. I asked if there was any chance it was a misunderstanding, maybe a dare or a joke in poor taste. Claire's voice got sharper and she said I could rationalize it however I needed to, but she knew what she'd seen, and it wasn't the first time apparently because David's comment about being careful implied this was ongoing. I felt my chest get tight, that physical sensation of panic where breathing becomes manual instead of automatic. I told Claire I needed to think and I'd call her back. She made me promise not to do anything stupid, and I said I wouldn't, though I had no idea what stupid would look like in this situation. I hung up and sat in silence for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 30. Time had stopped making sense. My hotel room suddenly felt too small and too quiet. The wedding was tomorrow at 3 p.m. We had a rehearsal dinner tonight that I'd skipped because I'd told everyone I needed to finalize some work stuff, but really I'd wanted time alone to process the enormity of getting married. I opened my laptop and downloaded the video from my phone, wanting a backup in case anything happened to the original. I watched it again on the bigger screen, and the details were even clearer. Natalie's engagement ring was visible when she touched David's face. David was wearing the watch I'd given him for his 30th birthday. They looked comfortable together, practiced, like this was routine rather than spontaneous. I took screenshots of the clearest moments, the kiss, their body language afterward, the timestamp. Then I went through my recent text conversations with both of them, looking for anything I'd missed. Natalie's messages were normal, excited about the wedding, reminding me about various details, sending me photos of flower arrangements, and asking my opinion. David's messages were also normal, logistical stuff about the bachelor party, coordinating groomsmen, checking if I needed anything for tomorrow. Nothing suspicious, nothing that would make me question either of them, which meant they were good at hiding this, whatever this was. I tried to think rationally about next steps, but rationality kept dissolving into anger and hurt and disbelief. I had 200 guests arriving tomorrow for a wedding that maybe shouldn't happen. I had vendors paid in full, a non-refundable venue, a honeymoon booked for Monday. I had parents who'd flown in from 3 different states, friends who'd taken time off work, a future that had seemed certain 12 hours ago and now felt like fiction. The logical part of my brain said I needed more information before making irreversible decisions. The emotional part said I already had all the information I needed. My fiancé had kissed my best friend the night before our wedding. The angry part wanted to call both of them immediately and destroy them with words. The hurt part wanted to disappear and never speak to anyone again. I sat there cycling through all these reactions, unable to land on any single course of action that felt right. My phone buzzed again. Text from Natalie. "Can't sleep, too excited for tomorrow. I love you so much, can't wait to be your wife." The message made me nauseous. I stared at it, trying to decide if she was genuinely unaware that Claire had caught her, or if this was calculated, covering her tracks just in case. I didn't respond. Another text came through 30 seconds later. "You okay? You always respond quickly. Getting nervous? Don't be. Tomorrow is going to be perfect." The casual intimacy of her messages, the assumption that I'd respond with matching enthusiasm, felt like violence now. I turned my phone face down and tried to think about what I actually knew versus what I was assuming. I knew Natalie had kissed David tonight. I knew they'd been alone in a bedroom at a party. I knew David had said something about being careful, implying ongoing deception. I didn't know how long this had been happening. I didn't know if it was physical or emotional or both. I didn't know if they'd planned to continue after the wedding or if this was meant to end before I found out. I needed to talk to someone objective, someone who could help me think clearly. I called my older brother Nathan, who lived in Seattle and was flying in tomorrow morning for the wedding. Nathan was an attorney, logical and measured, someone who dealt with high-stakes situations professionally. He answered sounding groggy. Time difference meant it was only 9:30 p.m. there, but he'd probably been asleep. I told him I was sorry for calling late, but I had a situation and needed advice. His voice immediately became alert, and he said to tell him everything. I sent him the video and talked him through the timeline while he watched. Nathan was quiet for a long moment after I finished, and then he said in his professional voice that I had clear evidence of infidelity and I should under no circumstances proceed with the wedding until this was fully investigated and resolved. He said the financial losses from canceling were irrelevant compared to the legal and emotional cost of marrying someone who was actively betraying me. He asked if I'd confronted either of them yet, and I said no. He said good, keep it that way until we had a plan. Nathan said he'd get on the earliest flight out, probably arriving around 6 a.m., and we'd figure this out together. He told me not to make any announcements or cancellations tonight because I wasn't thinking clearly, and I'd need to handle this strategically. He said to try to sleep if possible, which we both knew was impossible, but at least rest and don't spiral. He'd call me when he landed. I thanked him, and we hung up, and I felt marginally better having someone else aware of the situation, sharing the weight of it. I set an alarm for 5:30 a.m. and lay down on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept replaying the video, finding new details to obsess over. The way Natalie had smiled before kissing David, the way David had touched her hair, the ease between them that came from repetition. How many times had they done this? Where? Had it happened in my apartment while I was traveling for work? In David's place during the bachelor party planning sessions Natalie had supposedly helped with? Had they laughed about me afterward, pitied me for not noticing? Sleep didn't come. I lay there for hours watching the digital clock on the nightstand count minutes, each one bringing me closer to a wedding I couldn't imagine going through with, but also couldn't imagine canceling without absolutely destroying dozens of people's plans and expectations. Around 3 a.m., I got up and started going through my phone's photo history, looking at pictures of Natalie and me over the past 3 years. Vacations, holidays, ordinary moments. In every photo, she looked happy, genuine, in love. Had she been faking it the whole time? Had there been signs I'd missed because I'd been too trusting or too stupid to see them? I found photos from group events where David was present, him and Natalie standing near each other but not suspiciously close, smiling at the camera like normal friends. They'd been careful. That's what hurt most. The premeditation, the sustained deception requiring planning and coordination. My alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., and I'd never actually slept, just existed in this exhausted, anxious state for 6 hours. I showered and dressed mechanically, going through motions while my brain processed nothing except the video and its implications. Nathan texted at 6:15 a.m. saying his plane had landed early and he was grabbing a cab to my hotel. He arrived at 6:50 a.m. looking concerned and professional in a button-down shirt and khakis, his attorney face firmly in place. He hugged me without saying anything, and I realized I'd been holding myself together through force of will, and his presence made that unnecessary. I didn't cry, but I felt close to it, this overwhelming pressure behind my eyes that stayed controlled through effort. Nathan sat down and asked me to walk through everything again with as much detail as I could remember, and he took notes on his phone while I talked. When I finished, he asked if I had any direct evidence of previous encounters, or if the video was the only proof. I said just the video and David's comment about being careful. Nathan said that was enough for our purposes, which were to determine if the wedding should proceed and how to handle the aftermath if it didn't. He said before making any final decisions, we should consider the possibility of confronting them separately to get their stories, because sometimes people in crisis said things they wouldn't say otherwise. He suggested starting with David since David wasn't the one I was supposed to marry today, and his reaction might give us information about whether this was ongoing or a one-time mistake. I said I didn't think I could talk to David without losing control, and Nathan said that's why he'd be there. We'd do this together, structured like a deposition, factual and recorded. I asked if recording was legal, and Nathan said in this state, yes, as long as one party consented, and I was a party to the conversation. He suggested we invite David to my hotel room under some neutral pretense and confront him here where we controlled the environment. I texted David at 7:08 a.m. Hey man, can you come by my room? Need to go over something about the ceremony. He responded within 2 minutes. Sure, everything okay? Be there in 15. Nathan and I used that time to set up his phone to record video from the desk angle, where it would capture David's face and reactions. Nathan said to let him lead the questioning, and I should only speak if I could do so calmly. He said people revealed truth through body language and immediate reactions before they had time to construct lies, so the first 60 seconds after confrontation would tell us everything we needed to know. David knocked at 7:24 a.m., cheerful and oblivious. I opened the door, and he walked in saying something about how today was the big day, and was I getting nervous. He saw Nathan and his expression shifted to confusion, asking if everything was all right. Nathan introduced himself, even though they'd met several times before at various events, using his full name and credentials. Nathan Reeves, I'm an attorney, and also the groom's brother. Have a seat, David. David sat slowly, his smile fading into wariness. He asked what this was about, and Nathan said we had some questions about last night's activities. David's face remained neutral, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly, a micro-expression of tension. Nathan pulled out his phone and played the video without preamble. We watched David watch himself kiss my fiancée. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened like he was going to say something, but nothing came out. When the video ended, Nathan said, "We need you to explain what we just watched and how long this has been going on." David looked at me, and I looked back at him. This person I'd considered my closest friend for over a decade, and I didn't recognize him. His eyes were panicked, calculating. He said it wasn't what it looked like. They'd both been drinking. It was a stupid mistake that didn't mean anything. Nathan asked how many times this stupid mistake had happened. David said just that once, he swore, they'd gotten caught up in the party atmosphere and made a terrible choice. Nathan asked about his comment in the video about being more careful. How did that align with this being the first time? David went quiet. He looked at his hands, at the floor, anywhere except at me. Finally, he said they'd kissed once before, a few months ago after a planning session for the bachelor party, but it had only been those 2 times, and they'd both agreed it was wrong and it would never happen again. Nathan asked why it happened again last night if they'd agreed to stop. David said he didn't know. He'd been weak. Natalie had been upset about wedding stress, and he'd tried to comfort her, and things got out of hand. The story was falling apart in real time, inconsistencies piling up. Nathan asked what kind of wedding stress would lead Natalie to kiss someone who wasn't her fiancé the night before the wedding. David said he didn't know. Maybe she was having doubts. Maybe the pressure was getting to her. I spoke for the first time. my voice coming out flat and cold. Are you in love with her? David's head snapped up, and he looked at me with something like guilt mixed with defiance. He said it was complicated, that he cared about her, but he'd never meant for anything to happen. He'd tried to keep distance, but she kept reaching out, and he was weak. I asked when it started, and he hesitated before saying about 6 months after Natalie and I got engaged, so roughly 14 months of this running parallel to my relationship. I asked if they'd slept together, and he said no, just kissing, just emotional connection, nothing physical beyond that. Nathan asked if he had any proof of that claim, and David said no. How would he prove a negative? Nathan said then, we had no reason to believe his minimization. I asked David if he understood that he'd destroyed our friendship and possibly my wedding in one video. David said he was sorry. He knew sorry wasn't enough, but he genuinely regretted everything. I asked if he regretted doing it or regretted getting caught. He didn't answer that. Nathan asked if Natalie knew about the video, and David said he didn't think so. She'd texted him this morning acting normal about today's schedule. Nathan asked if David had planned to continue this relationship after the wedding, and David said no, they'd agreed to end it completely once I was married, that the wedding would be a clean break for both of them. The logic was so twisted it almost made me laugh. They'd carry on until the moment I legally committed to Natalie, then stop, and somehow that made it acceptable. I asked David to leave, and he stood up, started to say something else, changed his mind, and walked out. The door closed, and I sat down heavily on the bed, feeling like I'd run a marathon. Nathan stopped the recording and saved it to his cloud storage, then asked how I was doing. I said I didn't know how to quantify how I was doing. He said that was fair. He asked if I wanted to confront Natalie before deciding about the wedding, and I said yes, I needed to hear her version before making any irreversible choices. Nathan called his wife Melissa, who was already at the venue helping with setup, and asked her to get Natalie and bring her to my hotel room under some pretense about a surprise for me that needed Natalie's input. Melissa was confused but agreed. Nathan had that effect on people with his calm authority. We waited 25 minutes, and then there was a knock. Nathan opened the door, and Melissa came in with Natalie, who was wearing yoga pants and a sweatshirt, her hair in a messy bun, looking beautiful and tired and completely unaware. She saw me and smiled, started to say something about not being supposed to see each other before the wedding, then saw Nathan's expression, and her smile faltered. She asked what was wrong, and Nathan said Melissa could leave. This was between the three of us. Melissa left looking worried, and Natalie turned to me with growing alarm in her eyes. I said we needed to talk about last night, and her face went carefully blank, the same expression David had used, this mask of neutrality that screamed guilt. Nathan played the video. Natalie watched herself kiss David, and her hand came up to cover her mouth, tears immediately starting to fall. When the video ended, she was crying silently, not the manipulative crying of someone trying to gain sympathy, but the genuine crying of someone whose secret had just detonated. She said she was sorry over and over, that she'd made a terrible mistake, that she loved me and wanted to marry me, and this didn't change that. I asked how long it had been going on, and she said a few months, mostly just talking and emotional stuff. I asked if she'd slept with him, and she hesitated before saying yes, 3 times over the past year. The number hit me like a physical blow. David had lied about the physical aspect, trying to minimize his own culpability, which meant I couldn't trust anything either of them said. Natalie was still crying, saying it had been a mistake, she'd been confused about commitment, and David had been there listening to her doubts, and it had spiraled into something she never intended. I asked why she'd continued if she knew it was wrong. She said she'd tried to stop multiple times, but David kept pursuing her and she'd been weak. The blame shifting was immediate and predictable, both of them claiming the other had been the primary driver. I asked why she'd kissed him last night of all nights, literally hours before our wedding. She said she'd been panicking about the finality of marriage, and David had found her upset, and one thing led to another. I asked if she'd planned to continue after we were married, and she said no, absolutely not. The wedding was going to be her commitment to end it and focus entirely on our relationship. The same story David had told, which meant they'd discussed this scenario, practiced their explanations. I asked if she loved David, and she said no, she loved me. David was just a mistake she'd repeated too many times. Nathan asked if she had any proof that this would have ended after the wedding, and Natalie said no. She understood she'd destroyed my trust, and proof didn't exist for future intentions. I asked her to leave, and she started crying harder, saying, please, could we talk more? Could she explain better? Could I please not make any decisions while angry? I said I wasn't angry, I was clear, and I needed her to leave now. She looked at Nathan like he might intervene, and he said nothing, just stood there being a witness. Natalie walked to the door and turned back, said she was sorry one more time, and left. The silence after she left was immense. Nathan asked if I needed time alone, and I said no. I needed to cancel a wedding. He asked if I was certain, and I said I'd never been more certain of anything. Marrying someone who'd been lying to me for over a year, who'd slept with my best friend 3 times, who'd kissed him the night before our wedding, that wasn't something I could rationalize or forgive or pretend hadn't happened. Nathan nodded and said he'd help me handle the logistics. We started making a list of what needed to be done. Call the venue, call the vendors, notify immediate family, send a message to guests, return gifts. The venue was first. I called at 8:43 a.m. and got the events coordinator. a woman named Patricia Holbrook, who'd been our primary contact for 6 months. I told her I needed to cancel today's wedding, and she went silent before asking if this was a joke. I said, unfortunately, no. The wedding was off due to circumstances I'd discovered last night, and I understood there would be financial implications, but I needed to cancel immediately. Patricia said she'd never had a wedding cancel on the day of, that guests were probably already traveling, that vendors were already setting up. I said I understood, and I'd compensate everyone appropriately, but the wedding could not happen. She said she'd need to check with her manager and call me back. Nathan sent emails to our photographer, videographer, caterer, band, and florist, explaining that the wedding was canceled and they should cease all setup and preparation. He CC'd himself on everything to create a paper trail. My phone started ringing within minutes, vendors calling to confirm, to ask what happened, to discuss payment and cancellation fees. Nathan handled most of the calls, using his attorney voice to explain that the groom had discovered infidelity and the wedding was canceled. All contracts would be honored regarding payment, but services were no longer needed. My mother called at 9:15 a.m., crying before I even said hello. Someone had apparently already told her the wedding was off, and she wanted to know what happened. I told her I'd explain in person and asked where she was. She said at the hotel breakfast with my father and several relatives. I said Nathan and I would come down. We went to the hotel restaurant and found my parents sitting with my aunt and uncle, all of them looking shell-shocked. I sat down and showed them the video without preamble. My mother watched with her hand over her mouth. My father's face went hard and angry. My aunt made a small noise of dismay. When it ended, my mother said she was so sorry that she couldn't believe Natalie would do this. My father asked if I'd confronted her, and I said yes, both her and David. He asked what they'd said, and I summarized the conversations. My father asked what I needed from them, and I said I needed them to help notify extended family and friends that the wedding was canceled due to the bride's infidelity, and I'd appreciate if they kept the video private, but made clear this wasn't a mutual decision or cold feet. My mother started making calls immediately, her voice shaking as she explained to relatives that the wedding was off. My father asked about David, and I said David was no longer my friend or my best man, or anyone I'd acknowledge existing. My father nodded and said he'd make sure David understood he wasn't welcome at any family events going forward. Nathan's wife, Melissa, arrived and hugged me, said she'd heard pieces from vendors and wanted to check on me. I asked if she'd seen Natalie, and she said yes. Natalie was in her hotel room with her bridesmaids, apparently telling them some version of events. Melissa said the bridesmaids were confused and upset, some of them angry at Natalie, some defending her. I asked Melissa if she'd be willing to make a statement to Natalie's friends about what actually happened, and she said absolutely, people deserved to know the truth. By 10 a.m., the news had spread completely. My phone was flooded with messages from friends, distant relatives, co-workers, everyone asking if it was true and what had happened. I sent a group text to the groomsmen explaining that I'd discovered Natalie and David's affair last night and the wedding was canceled, and I appreciated their support, but needed space to process everything. The groomsmen's responses ranged from shock to anger to awkward sympathy. 2 of them said they'd suspected something between Natalie and David but hadn't wanted to say anything without proof. That hurt almost as much as the original betrayal, knowing people had noticed and stayed silent. One groomsman, my cousin Leo, called and said he'd seen them at a restaurant together 4 months ago when I'd been out of town, having dinner that looked more like a date than a planning session. He'd convinced himself he was misreading the situation, but now he felt guilty for not saying anything. I told him it wasn't his fault. They'd been deliberately deceptive. Leo said if I needed anything, including someone to confront David physically, he was available. I thanked him, but said violence would only complicate things. Patricia from the venue called back at 10:35 a.m. and said her manager had approved the cancellation, but they'd need full payment for the event since it was same-day notice. I said I understood and asked for the final invoice. She said it would be $38,000 covering all non-refundable deposits and day of coordination. Nathan took the phone and negotiated briefly, got the amount reduced to $32,000 by agreeing to sign a liability waiver and provide immediate payment. He asked if they could salvage any of the setup for a different event, and Patricia said some florals and decorations could be repurposed, but most vendor time was already spent. Nathan said to send the invoice and we'd wire payment that day. My father overheard and said he'd cover it. The money didn't matter compared to me not marrying someone who'd betrayed me. I thanked him and felt another wave of gratitude for my family's immediate support. Around 11 a.m., I went back to my hotel room to avoid the growing number of people trying to talk to me. I needed silence and space to process the implosion of my entire future in less than 12 hours. Nathan came with me, and we sat in the room not talking, just existing in the aftermath. My phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered, and a woman's voice said, "Is this the groom from the canceled wedding at Riverside Estate?" I said yes, and asked who was calling. She introduced herself as Kelly Nguyen, a freelance journalist who covered society events and weddings for a local lifestyle magazine. She said she'd heard about the cancellation and wanted to know if I'd be willing to share my story. I asked how she'd gotten my number, and she said a source at the venue had provided it. She'd been scheduled to cover the wedding as a featured event. I said I wasn't interested in publicity, and started to hang up, but she said she understood my privacy concerns. but sometimes public accountability helped prevent future victims and ensured the people responsible faced social consequences. That caught my attention. I asked what she meant by public accountability. She said if I provided evidence and went on record, she could write a piece about infidelity and wedding day betrayals that would include enough detail that anyone searching Natalie or David's names would find it. I thought about it for 30 seconds and said I'd call her back. I hung up and asked Nathan what he thought. He said from a legal standpoint it was risky because Natalie or David could potentially sue for defamation. But if everything I shared was documented and true, they'd have no case. I called Kelly back and said I'd do it if she agreed to fact-check everything with my documentation and let me approve the final piece before publication. She agreed immediately, said this kind of story resonated with readers, and she'd handle it sensitively. We scheduled a phone interview for that evening after I'd had time to organize my thoughts. Around noon, Claire arrived at my hotel room, hugged me without speaking, and sat next to me on the couch. She asked if I was okay, and I said no, but I would be eventually. She said she was sorry for being the one to show me the video, but she couldn't live with knowing and not telling me. I said she'd done the right thing, that marrying Natalie without knowing would have been worse than the pain of calling it off. Claire said Natalie had tried to call her several times this morning, and she'd blocked the number. I said that was probably smart. My phone buzzed with a text from David. I know you hate me, and I deserve it, but I need you to know I never meant to hurt you. I was weak and selfish, and I destroyed the most important friendship of my life. I'll understand if you never forgive me, but I'm sorry. I showed the text to Nathan and Claire. Nathan said not to respond. Anything I said could be used to claim I'd accepted his apology or been involved in ongoing communication. Claire said the text was performative garbage designed to make David feel better about himself. I deleted it without responding. The afternoon dissolved into a series of administrative tasks, returning wedding gifts to their senders with notes explaining the wedding had been canceled, canceling the honeymoon and losing the deposits on flights and the resort, calling my employer to let them know I wouldn't need the requested time off next week. Each task was a small death, dismantling the future I'd built in my head. By 3 p.m., the time when I would have been standing at an altar marrying Natalie, I was sitting in a hotel room eating room service and talking to a journalist about how I'd discovered my fiancé's affair. Kelly asked thoughtful questions, requested copies of my documentation, and promised to handle the story with integrity. She said her piece would run online tomorrow and in print the following week, and she'd send me a draft by tonight. I thanked her and hung up, feeling emotionally exhausted but strangely lighter. The truth was going to be public and permanent, which meant I wouldn't have to keep explaining to people what happened. Nathan stayed with me through the evening, ordering dinner and putting on a basketball game neither of us really watched. Around 8 p.m., Kelly sent the draft article. It was titled, When I Do Becomes I Don't, A Groom's Last-Minute Discovery of Infidelity. The piece was well-written and fair, presenting the facts without sensationalism. It included my quotes about discovering the video, confronting both Natalie and David, and making the decision to cancel. It mentioned their admissions of a 14-month affair with physical and emotional components. It named both of them, included their professions, and the fact that David had been my best man. Kelly had verified everything with the documentation I'd provided and included a note that both Natalie and David had been contacted for comment but declined to respond. I approved it and thanked her for the professional handling. She said the story would go live at 6 a.m. tomorrow, and she expected it would get significant traffic given the dramatic nature of the circumstances. I slept fitfully that night, waking every few hours to check my phone and find new messages from people who'd heard about the cancellation. Some were supportive, some were curious, some were judgmental, suggesting I must have done something to drive Natalie to cheat. Those messages hurt in a different way than the betrayal itself, this victim-blaming instinct people had to explain away inexplicable behavior. By 6 a.m., I was awake and staring at my phone when Kelly's article went live. I read it again in its published form and felt that strange mix of validation and exposure. Everything that had happened was now permanently documented and publicly accessible. I got dressed and went down to the hotel lobby for coffee, and the desk clerk recognized me from the wedding guest list and offered condolences. I thanked her and sat in a corner booth watching people come and go, all of them unaware that my life had fundamentally changed 48 hours ago. My phone started buzzing more frequently as the article spread. Friends shared it on social media with commentary, ranging from supportive to shocked. Several people tagged Natalie and David, though both had apparently deactivated or locked their accounts. By noon, the article had over 50,000 views and hundreds of comments. Some people shared their own stories of canceled weddings or discovered affairs. Some people criticized my decision to go public, saying private matters should stay private. Some people found Natalie's social media history and started posting screenshots of her wedding-related posts from weeks ago with comments about irony. I didn't engage with any of it, just watched the story take on its own life, independent of my involvement. Nathan said the public exposure was both a blessing and a curse. It meant I wouldn't have to constantly explain myself, but it also meant I'd lost control of the narrative. I said I was okay with that trade-off. Over the next week, I stayed with Nathan and Melissa in their house, avoiding my own apartment because too many memories of Natalie existed there. I focused on practical matters like changing emergency contacts, removing Natalie from shared accounts, and canceling orders we'd made together for our future home. Each task was a small acknowledgement that the future I'd planned was gone. Friends reached out offering support, and I accepted invitations to dinners and casual hangouts, trying to rebuild some sense of normalcy. David sent one more text saying he was moving to a different city for a new job opportunity, that being here was too difficult, given everything that had happened. I didn't respond. Natalie sent an email apologizing again and asking if we could talk in person. I deleted it without reading past the first line. Some bridges, once burned, didn't need rebuilding. A month later, I moved to a new apartment across town, somewhere with no history of Natalie or David or the life I'd almost had. I started therapy with a counselor named Dr. Rebecca Owens, who specialized in betrayal trauma and relationship recovery. Dr. Owens helped me process the layers of loss, not just losing Natalie, but losing David, losing the version of myself that had trusted easily, losing the future I'd envisioned. She said healing wasn't linear, and I'd have good days and bad days, and that was normal. The good days started outnumbering the bad days by early fall. I dated casually, nothing serious, just remembering how to connect with people without constant fear of betrayal. Work became a welcome distraction, a place where I could focus on problems with clear solutions and measurable outcomes. 6 months after the canceled wedding, I ran into one of Natalie's bridesmaids at a coffee shop. She recognized me and hesitated before coming over to say hello. She said she was sorry about everything, and she'd stopped being friends with Natalie after learning the full truth. She said Natalie had moved to a different state and was working for a new company, trying to start fresh. She said David had indeed left the city and was apparently engaged to someone he'd met at his new job. The irony wasn't lost on me. I thanked her for the update and she asked how I was doing. I said honestly, I was doing okay. Better than okay some days. She said I'd handled everything with more grace than most people would have, and she hoped I found someone who deserved my trust. I appreciated the sentiment, even though trust still felt like a complicated concept. A year later, I was in a relationship with someone I'd met through work, a project manager named Allison who was smart and funny and knew my history but didn't define me by it. We moved slowly, building trust through consistency and transparency. She never gave me reason to doubt her, and gradually I stopped looking for reasons. The scars from Natalie's betrayal were still there, probably always would be, but they'd faded from open wounds to closed tissue. I thought about that night sometimes, receiving Claire's video and watching my future dissolve in 2 minutes and 38 seconds. In retrospect, it was the worst thing that could have happened. Better to discover betrayal before legally binding myself to it. Better to face hard truth than live in comfortable lies. The wedding that didn't happen saved me from a marriage that would have destroyed me. If you made it this far, hit like. You've earned it.